You'll be dead by morning, the cartel lieutenant said, driving away with a cruel smile. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen lay in the sand, hands bound, throat dry. She had no weapons, no radio, no help. But she had something better, Delta Force training. And that changed everything. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The pickup truck stopped in the middle of nowhere. Sand stretched in every direction, broken only by dry bushes and rocks baking under the sun. The temperature was already climbing past 110 degrees, and it was only getting hotter. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen hit the ground hard when they pushed her out. Her hands were tied behind her back with plastic zip ties that cut into her wrists. Her throat was already dry from hours without water. A man stood over her, blocking the sun for just a moment. Lieutenant Marcos, the cartel's second-in-command, looked down at her with a cold smile. "You Americans think you're so tough," he said in accented English. "Let's see how tough you are without water." He tossed 2 water bottles into the sand, just out of reach. The men with him laughed. Then they climbed back into the truck and drove away, leaving her alone in the desert. Sarah watched the dust cloud fade into the distance. She counted the seconds. 5.10.15, when she could no longer hear the engine, she let out a slow breath and started working. 3 days earlier, Sarah had been part of a routine patrol near the Mexican border. Her team was tracking a kidnapped American aid worker. The intelligence said it would be a simple extraction. Get in, get the hostage, get out. But nothing ever went according to plan. The ambush came fast. Burning tires blocked the road. Gunfire erupted from both sides. An explosion flipped the lead vehicle. In the chaos and smoke, Sarah's team was separated. She and 2 others were captured. They stripped her of her gear, her weapons, her radio. They took her dog tags and ripped off her rank insignia. One of them found her tattoo, a small eagle behind her left ear, the mark she'd gotten after passing Delta Force selection. "What's this?" the young guard had asked, pointing at it. "Nothing," Sarah had replied. "Just a bird." They hadn't believed it was nothing, but they didn't know what it meant either. To them, she was just a small woman in a dirty uniform. Someone they could break. They were wrong. Sarah Chen had grown up in Arizona, in a small town where the desert was part of daily life. Her father had been a park ranger, and he'd taught her how to read the land. Which plants held water, how to find shade, how to move when the sun was at its peak. "The desert doesn't care about your plans," he used to say. "It only responds to what you do." When she joined the army at 19, that knowledge became useful. Basic training was hard, but she'd seen harder. The heat, the long marches, the instructors yelling in her face, none of it was new. She volunteered for airborne school, then ranger school. Each step took her closer to the kind of soldier she wanted to be. Not the loudest. Not the biggest. Just the one who never quit. Delta Force selection came 5 years into her service. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Weeks of walking through mountains with heavy packs. Navigation tests with no sleep. Instructors watching every move, waiting for her to break. But she didn't break. She learned something more important. She learned that survival wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the smartest. About staying calm when everyone else panicked. About seeing options when others saw only walls. The instructors had a saying, "We don't train you to be fearless. We train you to act despite fear." Now, tied up and alone in the desert, Sarah remembered those words. The sun hammered down. Sarah lay still for a moment, controlling her breathing. Panic was the enemy. Panic made you waste energy and water. Panic made you stupid. She needed to think. First priority, free her hands. The zip tie was tight, but not impossible. She rolled onto her side and felt along the ground. Sand, small rocks, some dried branches from a dead bush. She found what she needed, a flat rock with a sharp edge. Moving slowly, she positioned the rock behind her and began sawing the plastic tie against it. Back and forth, back and forth. It took 20 minutes. Her shoulders burned. Sweat ran down her face and stung her eyes. But finally, the plastic snapped. Her hands were free. Sarah sat up and rubbed her wrists. The skin was raw and red, but nothing was broken. She flexed her fingers and looked around, really looked, using everything her training had taught her. The sun was slightly west of center. That meant it was early afternoon, maybe 2 o'clock. The hottest part of the day was still ahead. She studied the terrain. To the east, she could see low mountains, hazy in the distance. That was where the cartel compound was. Maybe 20 miles away, maybe more. Between here and there, nothing but open desert. To the west, more nothing, north and south, the same. But the ground told a story. There was a shallow wash, a dried creek bed, running roughly north to south. During the rare rains, water flowed through there. That meant two things: it would be slightly cooler, and there might be plants with water still in their roots. She also noticed the wind. It came from the west in steady gusts. That would help cool her during the day, but it would also dehydrate her faster. Sarah made her decision. She would head to the wash, find what shade she could, and wait for the temperature to drop. Moving during peak heat was suicide. At night, when it was cooler, she would start the long walk east. Not away from danger. Toward it. In the wash, Sarah found an overhang where a large rock created a small patch of shade. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She crawled underneath and let her body rest. The water bottles Marcos had thrown were still out there, 20 feet away in the sun. She knew what he was doing. It was psychological torture. Make the prisoners see the water they couldn't have. Watch them break down trying to reach it. But Sarah wasn't going to play that game. Not yet. Those bottles were bait. The cartel might have someone watching from a distance, waiting to see if she'd go for them. Or they might come back to check on her, to see if she was dead yet. Either way, she needed to be smart. Instead, she focused on immediate survival. She dug down into the sand with her hands, going about 6 inches deep. The sand there was cooler and slightly damp. She pressed some of it against her neck and wrists, cooling her blood. Then she looked for plants. In the wash, she found a prickly pear cactus. Using a flat rock, she carefully broke off one of the pads and peeled away the spines. Inside, the flesh was moist. She squeezed it and let a few drops of liquid fall onto her tongue. It was bitter and barely enough to wet her mouth, but it was something. She also found a creosote bush. Breaking off a small branch, she chewed the leaves. They tasted terrible, but they would help keep her mouth from drying out completely. This was survival. Not comfortable. Not easy. Just enough to keep going. Sarah heard the truck before she saw it. The engine sound carried across the flat desert, getting louder. She pressed herself flat against the rock overhang and stayed completely still. The truck stopped near where they'd left her. 2 men got out. They were young, maybe early 20s, carrying rifles but holding them carelessly. "You think she's dead yet?" one asked in Spanish. "Maybe," the other replied. Marcos said to check. "Take a picture if she is." They walked toward where she'd been lying. When they didn't see her body, they stopped. Where'd she go? Maybe an animal dragged her. They looked around, but not carefully. They were lazy, bored. This was just an assignment to them. They walked a wide circle, kicking at the sand, then gave up. "Let's just tell him we couldn't find her," one said. "He won't care anyway." They climbed back in the truck and left. Sarah waited another 10 minutes, then moved. She ran quickly to where the water bottles lay and grabbed them both. Then she returned to her hiding spot. The bottles were hot from the sun, but the water inside was real. She opened one and took 3 small sips, forcing herself to stop. She had to ration this. Make it last. With water secured, she could think about the next problem, getting her team out. Most people in Sarah's situation would try to escape. Head west, away from danger, and hope to find a road or a town. That's what the cartel expected. But Sarah wasn't most people. Her training had taught her something important: rescue missions work both ways. Her team didn't know she was alive. They might not even be looking for her yet. And even if they were, finding one person in miles of desert would take days. But she knew where the compound was. She knew they were holding other prisoners there, including Corporal Davis, the young soldier who'd been captured with her. The military had a rule: leave no one behind. Sarah decided to live by it. She would go to the compound. She would find a way to signal her team. And she would make sure everyone got out. It was a crazy plan. But Delta Force had taught her that crazy plans sometimes worked, especially when the enemy thought you were dead. As the sun set, the desert transformed. The temperature dropped quickly. The rocks that had been too hot to touch now gave off warmth. Stars appeared, thousands of them, so bright they cast shadows. Sarah began walking east. She moved carefully, testing each step. At night, you couldn't see holes or loose rocks. A twisted ankle could be a death sentence. She used the stars to navigate, keeping the North Star at her left shoulder. Every hour, she stopped to rest and listen. The desert night was full of sounds. Coyotes in the distance, the rustle of small animals hunting. Once, she heard the distinctive buzz of a rattlesnake and froze until it moved away. She also listened for human sounds. Vehicles, voices, anything that would tell her where the cartel patrols were. Around midnight, she saw lights in the distance. The compound. It was closer than she'd thought, maybe only 10 miles now. She could reach it before dawn if she kept moving. But something made her stop. Training kicked in. If she could see their lights, they might have patrols out here. She needed to be more careful. Sarah found another wash and followed it, using the depression in the land as cover. She moved slower now, stopping every few minutes to watch and listen. That's when she heard the voices. 2 men sat by a small fire, talking and smoking. Their truck was parked nearby, engine off. They weren't actively patrolling. They were just killing time, waiting for their shift to end. Sarah crept closer, staying low. She was only 50 feet away now, hidden by darkness and a scraggly bush. She could hear everything they said. "I don't know why Marcos is worried," one man said. "The Americans won't come here. They know better." "He's paranoid," the other replied. "Ever since that thing in Juarez." "What thing?" "You didn't hear. Special forces hit one of our safe houses. Killed 15 men, got their people out. Marcos thinks they'll try it again." Sarah's heart beat faster. Her team was already working on a rescue. They were coming. She just needed to help them find the right target. The men kept talking, and Sarah kept listening. They mentioned guard rotations. Weak points in the compound security, the fact that most of the guards were inexperienced, just local guys hired for easy money. Then one of them said something that changed everything. "The American prisoners are in the East Building. Marcos wants to move them tomorrow." Tomorrow. Sarah had less time than she thought. She waited until the men finished their cigarettes and drove away. Then she continued toward the compound, moving even more carefully now. By the time the sky started to lighten, Sarah was within a mile of the compound. She found a position on a small rise where she could see the whole layout. It was smaller than she expected. Just a few buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence with barbed wire on top. Guard towers at 2 corners, but only one looked occupied. Several vehicles parked inside. Maybe 20 people total, she estimated. The east building was easy to identify. It was separate from the others, with bars on the windows. That's where they were keeping Davis and the others. Sarah spent an hour just watching. Learning the patterns. Guards changed every 4 hours. The morning shift was lazy, sleepy. They walked their routes slowly, often stopping to talk. The compound had one major weakness: they weren't expecting an attack. They felt safe out here. That made them careless. Sarah had no weapons. No radio. No backup. But she had something more important: she knew what she was doing. She began forming a plan. Sarah needed to contact her team, but how? She had no radio, no phone. She couldn't just walk up to the compound and ask to make a call. Then she remembered something from her training. In survival school, they'd learned improvised signaling techniques. Ways to communicate without technology. She looked around and found what she needed: rocks. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah arranged rocks on the ground in a specific pattern. From the ground, it looked like nothing. But from the air, it would be clear: an arrow pointing toward the compound, and next to it, the numbers 2 and 4 to indicate 24 hours until action. It was a long shot. The military would need to be doing aerial surveillance in exactly the right area at exactly the right time. But it was better than nothing. Next, she needed to create more obvious signs. She found a flat area near the wash and used rocks and dead branches to spell out a single word: alive. Again, only visible from above. But if they were looking, they'd see it. With the signals in place, Sarah turned her attention to the next problem: getting inside. Sarah watched the compound through the morning heat. She was looking for one specific thing: a routine break in security. Every place had one, a moment when attention lapsed. She found it during the shift change at noon. For about 10 minutes, while the new guards were getting briefed and the old guards were heading to rest, the east side of the compound was barely watched. But she still couldn't just walk up. She needed a distraction. That's when she saw the fuel drums. 6 of them, stacked near the generator shed on the west side. Old, rusted, probably full of gasoline or diesel. Sarah smiled. She had her distraction. She waited until dusk. Patience was everything. Rush in, and you die. Wait for the right moment, and you survive. When the sun was low and shadows stretched across the compound, Sarah moved. She approached from the south, where the fence line ran close to a rocky outcrop. Using the rocks as cover, she reached the fence. The chain link was old, rusty in places. She found a spot where the wire had started to separate from a post and pulled. It bent just enough to create a small gap at the bottom. Sarah squeezed through, moving slowly to avoid making noise. She was inside. Now came the dangerous part. She crept along the fence line until she reached the fuel drums. She was completely exposed here. If anyone looked her direction, she'd be seen. Working quickly, Sarah unscrewed the cap on one drum and tilted it slightly. Fuel spilled onto the ground. She repeated this with a second drum, creating a pool of gasoline. Then she pulled out the piece of flint she'd found in the desert, along with a rusty piece of metal from the fence. Striking them together, she created sparks. On the third try, the fuel ignited. Sarah was already running. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was loud. Flames shot up from the fuel drums, and thick black smoke poured into the sky. Alarms started blaring. Men shouted and ran toward the fire. Sarah ran the opposite direction, toward the east building. The guard who'd been standing outside the prisoner building was gone, pulled away by the emergency. Sarah reached the door and found it locked, but the lock was old. Using a piece of metal she'd picked up, she jammed it into the lock and twisted hard. Something inside broke, and the door swung open. Inside, she found them. Corporal Davis, a Navy communications specialist named Rodriguez, and the kidnapped aid worker they'd been trying to rescue. Davis looked up from where he sat against the wall. His face was bruised, and his arm was in a makeshift sling. When he saw Sarah, his eyes went wide. "Chen. We thought you were dead." "Not yet," Sarah said. "Can you walk?" "Yeah. Yeah, I can move." "Then let's go. Now." She helped them up. The aid worker was weak, barely able to stand. Rodriguez looked in better shape, but scared. Davis, despite his injuries, managed to give her a tired smile. "I knew you'd come back," he said. "We don't leave people behind," Sarah replied. "Come on." They moved out of the building into chaos. The fire was spreading. Guards were running everywhere with no coordination. Sarah led her group along the fence line, away from the flames and confusion. They were almost at the south fence when someone shouted behind them. "Stop! Stop or I shoot!" Sarah turned. Lieutenant Marcos stood 30 feet away, pistol raised. His face was twisted with rage. "You should have died out there," he said. "I'm hard to kill," Sarah replied. She pushed the others behind her, shielding them with her body. Her mind raced. No weapon. No cover. Too far to rush him. She needed to buy time. "Your compound is burning," she said calmly. "Your men are running in circles. You've already lost." "I haven't lost anything," Marcos shouted. "You're just one woman." "No," a voice said from above. "She's Delta Force." Everyone looked up. A helicopter appeared over the ridge, flying low and fast. Then another, Blackhawks, with U.S. military markings. Marcos's face went pale. His pistol wavered. "Drop the weapon," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Drop it now." For a moment, Marcos considered fighting. Sarah could see it in his eyes. Then reality hit him. He was outgunned, outmanned, and out of options. The pistol fell to the dirt. The helicopters landed inside the compound. Soldiers poured out, securing the area with practiced efficiency. A medic ran to Sarah's group and started checking them over. A major approached Sarah. He looked at her torn uniform, her sunburned face, and her raw wrists. Then he saluted. "Staff Sergeant Chen. Good to have you back." Sarah returned the salute. "Good to be back, sir." "The others?" "All accounted for. Your signal worked. We picked it up during a surveillance pass yesterday. When we saw the compound location, we moved fast." He paused. "You walked 20 miles through the desert." "More like 30, Sarah said. I took the scenic route." The major almost smiled. "Delta always does. Come on, let's get you home." As they lifted off, Sarah looked down at the burning compound. Cartel members were being rounded up by military police. The fire was being contained. It was over. Davis sat across from her in the helicopter, his head back against the wall, eyes closed. "Hey Davis," Sarah said over the noise of the rotors. He opened his eyes. "You did good. Staying strong in there. That mattered." He nodded, too emotional to speak. Sarah looked out the window at the desert passing below. Somewhere down there was the spot where they'd left her to die. The place where she'd been tied up, alone, with no water and no hope. Except she'd never been without hope. That's what Delta had taught her. Hope isn't a feeling. It's a decision. The debriefing took days. Sarah answered every question about the ambush, the capture, the escape, and the rescue. They wanted to know every detail, and she gave it to them. But the part that interested them most was how she'd survived alone in the desert with nothing. "What made you go back?" one intelligence officer asked. "You could have walked away. Headed west toward safety. Why risk it?" Sarah thought about that. "Because that's not what we do," she finally said. "We don't leave people behind. That's not just a saying. It's who we are." The officer nodded and made a note. Later, in a small ceremony with no cameras or press, Sarah received a commendation for her actions. The general who pinned it on her uniform spoke quietly. "What you did out there wasn't just survival. It was leadership. You kept your team together even when you were separated. You completed the mission even when everyone thought you were dead. That's what Delta Force is about." Sarah stood at attention. "Thank you, sir. We're recommending you for a promotion," the general continued. "Your name has been flagged for advanced leadership training. But there's no rush. Take the time you need to recover. You've earned it." After the ceremony, Sarah called her father. He answered on the second ring. "Sarah. How are you feeling?" "I'm okay, Dad. Really, just tired. I read the report they cleared for me to see. 20 miles through the desert. I taught you well." Sarah smiled. "You taught me to respect the desert. The army taught me what to do with that respect. I'm proud of you, kiddo." "Thanks, Dad." They talked for a while longer about simple things. Her mom's garden, the weather back home. Normal life, the kind that felt strange after everything that had happened. When she hung up, Sarah walked out to the base training field. Soldiers were running obstacle courses, doing drills, learning the basics. She remembered being one of them, years ago. Young and uncertain but determined to prove herself. Now she was the one others looked up to. The one whose story would be told in training sessions. Remember that Delta operator who survived in the desert? But Sarah didn't think of herself as special. She thought of herself as prepared. Training mattered. Discipline mattered. Staying calm mattered. And never, ever quitting mattered most of all. 6 months later, Sarah was back on active duty, leading her own team. They were good soldiers, well-trained and motivated. But they were also young, still learning what it meant to be part of Delta Force. During a training exercise in the mountains, one of her team members struggled. He was carrying a heavy pack through rough terrain, and he was falling behind. She could see him getting frustrated, angry at himself. Sarah dropped back and walked beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm slowing everyone down," he said. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this. You know what Delta Force selection taught me?" Sarah said. "It's not about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about being the one who keeps going when everyone else stops." The soldier looked at her. "Is it true what they say? That you walked 30 miles through the desert after the cartel left you?" "It's true." "How did you do it?" Sarah thought about her answer. "One step at a time. I didn't think about the whole distance. I just focused on the next step. Then the next one. That's all survival is. Small decisions, made over and over, until you reach the end." The soldier adjusted his pack and kept walking. His pace picked up a little. That's what leadership was, Sarah realized. Not dramatic speeches or big moments. Just walking beside someone and reminding them they could do it. Years later, when Sarah finally retired from the military, reporters asked her about that mission. They wanted to know about the drama, the action, the near-death experience. But Sarah always brought the conversation back to something simpler. "People think survival is about being tough," she said. "About fighting and never showing fear. But that's not it. Survival is about being smart. It's about staying calm. It's about making good decisions when everything around you is chaos." "And what was the most important decision you made out there?" one reporter asked. Sarah smiled. "To keep going. Everything else followed from that." The story of Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen became required reading in Special Forces training. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. It showed what training could do. What discipline meant. What never quitting looked like. The cartel members who captured her served long prison sentences. Lieutenant Marcos, during his trial, was asked about that day in the desert. "We thought she was nothing," he said quietly. "Just a small woman. We were wrong. We didn't see the soldier. We didn't see the training. We didn't understand what Delta Force means." The desert where Sarah was abandoned is still there, unchanged. The rocks she arranged into signals have been scattered by wind. The place where she fought for survival looks like anywhere else now. But the lesson remains: real strength isn't about size or weapons. It's about the decision to survive. To adapt. To never accept defeat. They left her to die in the desert. They thought the sun and heat and emptiness would break her. They were wrong. Because Delta Force doesn't create superheroes. It creates soldiers who understand that survival isn't magic. It's training, discipline, and the simple choice to take one more step, make one more decision, survive one more day. And when you make that choice, again and again, you don't just survive. You win. Sarah Chen continued to serve for 15 more years before retiring with the rank of Master Sergeant. She now teaches survival skills to new recruits, passing on the lessons she learned in the desert. Corporal Davis recovered from his injuries and continued his military career. He credits Sarah with saving his life, not just physically but mentally, by showing him what real courage looks like. The compound where they were held was demolished. The land returned to desert, empty and quiet. But the memory of what happened there lives on in every soldier who learns that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, no matter what. That's what Sarah Chen did in the desert. And that's what Delta Force means: never quit, never stop, never leave anyone behind.